What's up, Wizards? It's Dev. SVMTG, we like that magic stuff, and believe it or not, we've actually got some magic content for you today. I know, it's crazy, and it's a big one, too. We're going to talk tier lists, because I think it's about time to do that. It feels like Core 2021's been out for about a month. I think it's closer to 3 weeks, but I don't care. Because in another month or so, spoiler season for the Zendikar set is going to start, so I feel like we're about at the halfway point, and it's a good time to take stock of power levels at this point. And we're going to do that the same way we always do it, and that's by using numbers, actual facts, and data. We're going to crunch statistics. That's how you come to conclusions, it turns out. You don't just subjectively say, well, I like this deck. This video is not going to be me just being like, well, I've been playing with Doom Foretold. I like Doom Foretold. No, we're not doing that. No, we're actually going to look at different events that have occurred over the course of this season so far. And we're going to determine which decks have done the best so far, and then those will be the best decks. See how we went about that scientifically? I know not everyone likes that for some reason, but that's what, like I explain every time, that's what we's doing. Now, there's been a few different events so far. On MTGO, I think there have been 5 standard challenges since this set has come out. There have been 6 standard leagues, which aren't weighted quite as heavily. There's been a standard preliminary, which again, I don't weight quite as heavily as challenges, because challenges, I think, on MTGO are the most heavily weighted thing. But there's also been 2 Red Bull Untapped events. One of them just happened tonight as I record this video. And there's also been 2 Star City Games events, one an invitational qualifier, and then the seasonal championship, which also just wrapped up tonight. That's why I waited to do this video, is because those are 2 pretty high-profile tournaments, and I wanted to put that data into consideration for this video. Now, as usual, it's kind of a struggle deciding whether or not I want to start from the top, work my way down, or go the opposite direction, which is start from the bottom, work my way to the top, which is how we've always done it before, the latter way. So I think I'll stick with that for this video and kind of start with Tier C, which is probably better known as Tier 2.5 to Magic players. And there's only a couple of decks in this tier, but they have produced some results without having really produced like any actual impressive results this season. So I guess down here in Tier 2.5, we'll put Simic Flash and Gruul Aggro. I'm not really sure there's too much separation between these 2 decks. Now, Gruul Aggro has actually produced real results, getting 1 top 16 in a standard challenge, as well as 3 League 5-0s this season so far. Simic Flash has failed to place in any standard challenges, at least in the top 16, but it does have 3 League 5-0s as well. So these are both decks that sometimes do pretty well in the leagues, but they don't really go too far beyond that, at least not in this season. They haven't evolved too much. Simic Flash has gotten pretty much nothing from the last couple of sets, except for like Sea Dash or Octopus. You'll see that in there sometimes. And a couple of other cards, but really not much from Core 2021 at all. And as far as Gruul Aggro, this picked up Primal Might from Core 2021, but it doesn't flex it quite as hard as Mono Green Aggro does. For whatever reason, Mono Green Aggro has become the much better deck over Gruul. Apparently, just Evercleave isn't worth playing, especially in a 2-color deck anymore. So Gruul Aggro just hasn't really been producing too many results. And like I said, I don't have too much to say about these 2 decks because they haven't produced any results hardly at all between the 2 of them. But they are at least still decks that are on the radar and you want to look out for and could, move up the tier list at some point in the future if there's some innovating or if the format tips and tilts in any way. These 2 decks might be able to take advantage of that. But we move on to the B tier here, which is Tier 2. And Tier 2 are always relatively strong decks. None of these decks are an exception to that. I feel like pretty much any of these decks could steal an event any day, but pretty much none of them have. So they've yet to do that. But if I had to pick like the worst of the decent decks in Standard, right now it looks like results-based. It's probably Yorion. There are a few different Yorion builds right now. Very often you see Bant, but there's also Azorius Yorion, and even Esper Yorion has come across the pipeline a couple of times this season, but hasn't produced too many good results. But as far as just Yorion decks, you've got like 3 top 8 finishes in different standard challenges, and then 3 League 5-0s. So this is obviously a step up from the last 2 decks we talked about, because it does at least have top 8 finishes in standard challenges, but it hasn't really shown up at any of the real big events like Red Bull Untapped. Or either SCG event this season. Sometimes, again, I think one of the Esper Yorion decks was at the SCG event, if I'm not mistaken. The one that just happened, the seasonal championship. But I think that deck was like top 16 at that event, so like Yorion still shows up. It's a real deck in this format, but it hasn't been taken seriously enough to really show up too much in any of the big name events, and even in challenges and whatnot, it struggles to finish very highly, right? They get top 8 finishes every now and again, but there's been 5 different standard challenges, and it doesn't top 8 or even top 16 in all of them. So I think the Yorion deck is maybe just struggling for the correct build right now, because obviously you get 80 cards to mess around with. You've got a lot of slots to fill, and we're not really sure what the best ways are of filling those slots. So I think that Yorion is one of those decks, too, that could, like I said earlier, it exemplifies these B-tier decks in that they could steal an event one of these days. They just haven't yet done that. But I think there are 3 better decks in the B-tier than any of the Yorion decks that we've seen so far. So moving on, we'll talk about Mono Red, which I didn't really expect to even be on the tier list, but it has been picking up a little bit. It got first in a standard challenge not too long ago, just reminding us all that we have to remember this deck exists. It got 6th in another standard challenge, so it's top 8'd 2, first in one of them, and then it top 8'd the SCG Seasonal Championship as well. I just didn't expect that deck to show up, but it was top. I think it was number 6 in the top 8. So Mono Red is still a deck that can pop up and take people by surprise and just punish people for different strategies. We've been through this sort of pendulum swinging in the format the last 2 weeks now, where decks are packing fewer and fewer sweepers in the main as time goes on, right? You used to see in Bant you'd have 3 to 4 Shatter the Sky in most main decks. Now they're bringing it down to 2 copies of Shatter the Sky. Or if they play Jal Real in their main deck, they'll have 1 or 0 copies of Shatter the Sky sometimes. And I think Mono Red is a deck that can punish those kinds of deck building decisions. Teamer Reclamation, another one of the best decks in the format. It's been cutting the Storm's Wrath from the main. It's been cutting Flame Sweeps from the main. And again, Mono Red can sweep up and take advantage of those kind of deck building decisions as the format shifts. So, again, Mono Red just exists, and it's going to keep reminding people that it exists, but it hasn't really seen too much play in Standard League so far, and it really hasn't seen much play in Challenges either. But when it does show up, Mono Red can always surprise people, and I honestly hesitate to use the word surprise, because I don't think it surprises anybody that Mono Red is a hungry deck, right? So it's not bad, and it's probably not going to be bad until rotation. But moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about Sultai Ramp here in the B tier. This is the second best deck in B tier, and oddly enough, I think it's right there with Mono Red in terms of playability as a deck in the present time, right? This deck has done some impressive things. It got an 8th place at a Star City Games Invitational Qualifier. And it also has top 16 finishes in both the Red Bull and Star City Game events. So this deck does show up in higher level play. But the really impressive thing is that it has 9 League 5-0 finishes altogether, which is more than any other deck on this entire list. This is just a league killer. And there are only a couple of different versions of the deck that are going around, but they're both pretty innovative. They're not really what you'd think. I haven't said this yet, but if you want, to look at any of these decks that we're talking about, or at least samples of them, I'll have links in the description to each and every deck that we talk about. And for Sultai Ramp, there's a really interesting list out there for that deck that I'll put up in the description. Because again, it doesn't look as good as you think. You'd think that the whole reason that you even play Sultai is to play Casualties of War, and to a lesser extent Eliminate. And maybe Thought Erasure or Agonizing Remorse or something. But so far, it's proven to be a better choice to play white instead of black in your deck if you're going to play blue-green. And use Teferi and Elspeth Conquers Death and Shadow the Sky. It's just proven to be mostly a better strat than adding the black cards. So I do love Sultai Ramp, but I can't really give it a super high position, because as Bant creates more and more separation, becomes a good deck in this format, we see Sultai being left by the wayside. And again, just not really seeing play in too many high-level events, because Bant is just kind of obviously a better choice, all things considered. But Casualties of War is a great card. Eliminate's a great card. Hand Disruption is really good right now. So I think Sultai has a place in the format, but it's definitely not at the big boy table. That said, being, towards the top of Tier 2 means that you can do really well in events. It's not a bad deck at all. No deck that I talk about today is a bad deck. Let me just throw that out there. But coming up at the top of B tier, a deck that I really want to break through, but I feel like it's getting less and less popular as the season moseys on here, but that's Mono Black Embrace. Now, this does have some important results, right? 4th and 5th in a standard challenge. It's got 8 other challenge top 16s, which is probably the best stat that this deck has. Placing 8 different decks in top 16s and challenges is really, really good. And again, very often, this deck will top 8 as opposed to top 16, but it just hasn't really broken through yet. And again, this one is one that hasn't really been brought to too many of the big name events, although I do think it top 16 at either the Red Bull or the Star City Games event tonight. If not both, but don't quote me on that. I think it was the Red Bull event that this got top 16 in, but again, I'm not quite sure. It was one of those two events at top 16 just tonight. So people are still playing the deck. But again, it hasn't really broken through to the truly higher levels of higher level play. I really like this deck. I think Demonic Embrace is a great card for it. But again, I'm not sure Demonic Embrace was what the deck needed to truly, truly shine. But I think if you're going to play an aggro deck in the format right now, this is probably the best pure aggro deck we have access to. And it's going to take a hit for rotation, right? This deck made Spawn of Mayhem better. This deck, fully utilizes cards like Rotting Regisaur. But, it did pick up some tech, not only to get Demonic Embrace, but it also got Kitesail Freebooter, Eliminate, Grasp of Darkness. There's some cool things this deck got. But I'm pretty sure after rotation, unless we see something that can make up for Spawn of Mayhem and Rotting Regisaur, the deck is just DOA. And I doubt, what's going to make up for Rotting Regisaur, right? Unless they reprint that card. But the deck only has a very small window at this point to continue performing, and I really hope that it does a little bit better in the next month here, but I think it's kind of spinning its wheels right now, and I'm not sure it's going to climb into the A tier. But right now I'll put it at the very top of Tier 2, so that's a good place to be. But let's move up to A tier, better known as Tier 1.5 to most Magic players. And honestly, it's a toss-up for the first slot in this tier. There are 3 slots in this tier. And it's kind of a toss-up between Junsack and Rakdos Sack, because it kind of depends on what tournament you go to, what event you attend. Because, on slower days where you have a little bit more time to develop your board and get card advantage off of Trail of Crumbs, Junsack is just the much, much better deck. But, in fields where games go a little bit faster, Rakdos Sack is usually going to be better against a field full of aggro decks and whatnot. But both decks can take out via Mayhem Devil, smaller creatures and whatnot. But it just is a fact of life that the Junsack deck takes a little bit longer to, get online. And once it gets going, it gets much better card advantage through Trail of Crumbs. So it really kind of depends on what you want. What you want out of your sacrifice deck. Because these two decks do play fairly differently, right? Rakdos Sack plays a lot of low to the ground stuff, doesn't have a very high curve, plays Giganta nowadays. In the companion slot, every now and again you'll see that. As a matter of fact, the version that plays Giganta in the companion slot just won the Star City Games seasonal champs. First place, just won that tournament. So I guess for today I would put Rakdos Sack a little bit higher than Junsack. But again, it really depends on what sort of changes and shifts the metagame is going through week to week. Is the format slow this week? Maybe Junsack, because you'll have more time to develop your board state. But is the format quicker this week? And I think it will be this upcoming week, by the way. In that case, Rakdos Sack is the better deck. As far as actual accolades here, not only does Rakdos Sack have first in that SCG Seasonal Championship, which is probably its biggest claim to fame this season, but it's also got 2 top 8 finishes at the first Red Bull Untapped event, 4-1 in the Standard Preliminary, not bad, 2 top 8s in Standard Challenges, and then 5 League 5-0s. However, Junsack also has 5 League 5-0s. It has 6 top 16 challenge finishes, as well as 2nd and 3rd in one Standard Challenge and 3rd place in another Standard Challenge. So both of these decks are, in some ways, in terms of results, much, much better than a lot of the other decks that we've already covered so far, and that's what puts them in the A tier, is that these are both decks with actual, real, consistent tournament results. They're guaranteed not to be flukes, and both of these decks have been, not only mainstays of the format for the last couple of seasons, but they have been evolving in some ways, especially Rakdos Sack, which has experimented with Call of the Death Dweller. It's experimented with Archfiend's Vessel. Doesn't play as many of those cards anymore. Even Call of the Death Dweller, some versions cut. But it did pick up Village Rites. So I feel like that deck has evolved a little bit more than Junsack, which sometimes plays 0 new cards. So, but either way, they're both still formidable decks that can definitely pick up events, as we've just seen tonight, as a matter of fact, at the SCG Seasonal. So obviously great decks, and I think that they're much, that step above some of the B tier decks that we already talked about. But if I wanted to pick up a better, I said there are only 3 slots, so there's one more deck in the B tier, or excuse me, in the A tier. But I think the best deck in Tier 1.5, believe it or not, y'all, again, this is results-based, and I'm going to give you those results, but believe it or not, is Mono Green Stompy, whose star was on the rise until recently, but I think it's going to be sort of on the downswing here in the next, that last month of the season. I think Mono Green Stompy will remain a powerful and played deck at high level events, but I'm thinking again that some of that use will continue to drop off as it has in the last week. But not to say people haven't been using the deck. It got first in a standard challenge, second in another standard challenge, 12 top 16 finishes in challenges, 12 other top 16 finishes, as well as 4-1 in the standard preliminary. Top 8 at the first Red Bull Untapped event, 8 League 5-0s, second only to Sultai ramps. So the deck has really been consistent on just about every front, right? Whether you want a Red Bull event, I think it got 9th in the Red Bull event tonight, so another top 16 finish in a Red Bull event. Whether you want, high-level tournaments or you want standard challenges, you want league, you want the preliminary, it has produced results, and a lot of them at every level of event that you possibly can at this moment in Magic playing history. So you really got to give it to Mono Green. The rise was quite real. I tried to tell you. That's the only time I'm going to say it. But I've been advocating for Mono Green Stompies for a whole season and a half at this point. But it looks like Mono Green Stompy is finally being accepted as a real deck when we all knew that it was. But in any case, there's a lot of different ways you can build this deck. But the two biggest pieces of innovation that it got were Primal Might. For one, this card has just done so much for this deck. And sometimes you'll see like 4 Primal Might, sometimes you'll see 1 to 2 Primal Might. So there are like all kinds of different, versions of this that you'll see. But for the most part, Primal Might has been like one of the biggest boons for the deck out of Core Set 2021. Aside from that, sometimes you'll see Garrick even, right? But not very often will you see Garrick. But the other big innovation for this deck has just been Scavenging Ooze. At first I thought maybe Stompy'd play like a 2 of Ooze in the main deck, but no, they all play a play set of Scavenging Ooze in the main. If you come up against other creature decks, it's amazing, but even if you're playing against Control, it just eats like Teferis in the graveyard, so they can't Elspeth Conquers Death them. It eats Euros in the graveyard and gets a counter, so they can't escape their Euros. So this fights against some of the better decks in the format in some really interesting ways, and it has more dimensions than you might think a Mono Green Aggro deck would have, right? And obviously Questing Beast is an unbelievable card, so Green has some really powerful creatures right now that, it's not going to lose it's going to lose some of them, but it won't lose like Questing Beast anytime soon. So, Mono Green Stompy could continue on until the foreseeable future being a real deck, especially if he keeps getting pieces as good as Primal Might and Scavenging Ooze. So definitely the top of A tier, but I'm not quite ready to put it in the S tier just yet. But speaking of the S tier, here we are. This is tier 1 right here, the very first tier there ever was and ever is. Now, honestly, there are only two decks in this tier, and you may have already guessed what they were, but I guess I'll cover the worst of them first, right? the worst of the best decks in the format. I keep using the word worst. This is still like the second best deck in the format, is Bant Ramp. I've alluded to this earlier when I was talking about Sultai, but just it's much better if you're going to play the blue-green, growth spiral Euro deck, which is kind of what it basically is. It's best now, and it's been determined it's best, to just add white to the deck rather than most any other color. And play Teferi and Elspeth Conquers Death for their control-y properties, right? They're just two unbelievable cards. And they work really well together because you can use Teferi to bounce your own Elspeth Conquers Death, play it again. If they ever kill you Teferi, you get it back with Elspeth Conquers Death, play your Teferi, bounce your Elspeth Conquers Death. It just works really well together. It's super annoying too. Just that combination of two cards. But while Teferi, 3 Fairy is still in the format, I definitely think that this is just going to remain, the best shell for Teferi, and just the best shell for Teferi wins, right? I mean, not only is this the best shell for Teferi and Elspeth Conquers Death, but it's also the best shell for, Euro and Growth Spiral, or at least the second best shell. Actually, that's the top 2 decks are Growth Spiral / Euro decks. So I guess it's all in whether or not you want to play a more control-y game. You play Teferi in your deck, and Elspeth Conquers Death to have like a really good removal piece, or and whether or not you want to just go for the combo kill in the late game. But this deck, again, a little bit more control-y, kind of feels like a mid-range deck sometime, and it does have some combos, but it's mostly just a control machine that has a lot of answers. And then eventually you just, kind of outlive your opponent. And it's probably been the best control shell of this format. Now, there is an Azorius control deck that's popping up again, right? Azorius control was a real deck just last season. But as Mono Green Stompy becomes more and more popular, and even Teamer Reclamation and Bant Ramp, as these decks become more popular, the blue-white deck is kind of rising up. It's especially good against Stompy's plan, though, and it always has been. Just any mid-range deck like Stompy, Control is going to be very, very good against because they have extra time to get to their Shadow the Sky and all that. Teferi is usually very good against that deck, except for Questing Beast, but still. A lot of what, obviously they play a lot of targets for Elspeth Conquers Death. So again, the blue-white Control deck has really, kind of risen up in the last week here to combat these Mono Green Stompy decks, but I don't really have a place for it on this poll because it hasn't really produced results this season, but maybe it will. Maybe it will. In lieu of that, though, I think Bant Ramp is just the better version of the Azorius deck because you get to play Euro as kind of a control finisher. You get to play Growth Spiral, which is instant speed, draw a card for 2 mana, which you want in your control deck anyway, but it also ramps you. So I just think if you're going to play control right now, Bant Ramp is the best way to go. And in terms of results, it's got a lot of them. First and third in a standard challenge, second in a standard challenge, top 8s at both of the Red Bull events, top 8 of the SCG Seasonal Championship. It's got 5 League 5-0s, so just result after result after result after result. This deck keeps getting them, and not only good results, top 8s and top 16s, but, first and third, second, right? Like, it's definitely one of the best, if not the best deck in the format. But when it comes to the actual best deck in the format, I don't think there's any doubt, and I don't think it's a huge surprise that it's still Teamer Reclamation. A deck that, like, 2 tier lists ago, I was saying, like, it's coming, everybody, better watch out for Teamer Rec. It could definitely, like, make a move at the top slot. And it has done that. It has definitely picked up top slot. I forgot to talk about some of the innovations that Bant Ramp has made, because it has made some. You'll see Joel Real. I've already talked about that. But sometimes you'll see random stuff like Ugin in there, like a one-of Ugin. Sometimes you'll even see Cultivate. Or, Lana War Visionary, the 3-mana, mana dork that taps to, or ETBs and draws a card. Some decks play 2 of that. So, the Bant list has become much more varied than it used to be. And Joel Real has been an especially important addition to that deck. You'll also see Sublime Epiphany as a 2-of every now and again, but not as often. But when it comes to the Teamer deck, this deck hasn't really evolved that much at all. Some of these play literally 0 new cards, although occasionally you'll see Rada in these, but like very, very sparingly. These decks are more or less the same decks they've been for the last 2 months. And why would they change? Why mess with success? This has gotten first and second in 2 different standard challenges. First and second at the first Red Bull event. 6 out of the top 8 at the most recent Red Bull event, that one tonight. 5 out of the top 8 at the SCG Seasonal Championships. And then 4 out of the top 8 at that first Star City Games IQ. So this just keeps getting, again, not only top 8 results, but, first, second, third in all these huge events. This one does not have the same problem some other decks have, where people just don't show up to the big events with them. This is one of the only decks people show up to the big events for. It was either Red Bull, I think it was Red Bull, that was 45% Teamer Reclamation after day 1. I think actually it was, I want to say one of these recent events was 60% Teamer Rec on day 2, right after the cuts were made. So it's just an abusive, oppressive deck right now. And there's only a month left in the format, but I kind of want to advocate in some ways for just like ban Wilderness Reclamation. Like, just do it for the last month. It's going to rotate out in a month anyway, so you could say, like, just let it rotate. But if you want to keep the format fresh for the next month, I actually kind of think banning Wilderness Reclamation would not, like, be the worst thing in the world. I really don't. I mean, you can feel either way about that. If you're heavily invested in Wilderness Reclamation and you spend like $400 on the deck and you don't want them to ban it because you're actually still playing it in paper, or you spent like Mythic Wildcards on something, Euros, I guess, for the deck. You can use your Euros somewhere else, but either way, if you feel like you've got an emotional or time or money investment put into the deck, don't mind me, right? If you don't want to see the card ban, don't get too like upset by what I'm saying, but I just think it would be like kind of fun to try to shake up standard for the last month and ban Wilderness Reclamation and 3-mana Teferi. They're going to rotate anyway, right? Just go ahead and ban them. We'll see what the format's going to look like. It's kind of a preliminary little shake-up. I think that would be cute, but either way, Teamer Reclamation is just far and away, pretty obviously the best deck in the format right now. And again, I think Bant Ramp is second to it. But after that, I think there's just a fairly large degree of separation in power level. That said, Mono Green Stompy, Rakdos Sack, Jun Sack, these A-tier decks, these will continue to win events every now and again. They'll continue to do very strongly in events as well. But in terms of overall consistency, and not only just consistency, but like actual weight of results, Team Rec and Bant Ramp to a lesser extent, definitely Team Rec, are just obviously the best decks in the format right now. And I think you could make an argument that in some ways that's because of, for lack of a better word, stubbornness, right? People have been playing Reclamation for months and months now. They didn't have to innovate on the deck, so why innovate on the deck? The deck wins, so... people are already invested in it, both sort of emotionally and time-based and monetarily. People are already invested in the deck that play high-level Magic. So again, they don't want to switch from it and learn a new deck at the very end of the season. I think there's a lot of different factors that go into Team Rec being the quote-unquote best deck, but in terms of just looking at hard results, the data, it does not lie. Team Rec is easily the best deck in the format. But there is one more deck I want to talk about before I get out of here, and that is the deck that won the Red Bull event tonight. That's Mono White. This might just be flash in the pan. Who knows? I think it's mostly just a deck that punishes decks for not playing so many main deck sweepers. And even though you could play sweepers in your, game 2 and 3, the deck plays a lot of stuff like Garrison Cat, Hunted Witness, the new, I always forget its name. The new Adante Vanguard, Seasoned Hallowblade. I got it. It's the 2-mana 3/1. You discard a card, you tap it, it gains indestructible. So the deck plays a lot of cards that punish sweepers and play through sweepers, right? So I think it's a really interesting deck. Before I came on camera, I played about 7 or 8 games in ranked with that Mono White deck, and I did not much care for it. And I'm kind of an advocate for Mono White aggro. But, if you're playing against a field full of Team Rec and Bant Ramp and decks that don't play creatures and do play sweepers, I think that Mono White deck's really, really good. But I did not play against that field. I played against decks actually playing creatures, and that Mono White deck was not very good for me. But either way, I think Mono White might be really good in that field full of Team Recs and Bant Ramps. So keep your eye out for that deck. But winning one Red Bull Untapped event does not, consistent data-driven results make. So I can't really judge that deck or, again, Azorius Control as well as I can some of these other decks. But it's definitely a deck that I would be on the lookout for moving forward, and a deck that definitely has a lot of different ways to build it. I've been playing Mono White aggro a good bit and doing fairly well on the ladder with it too this season, but my deck does not quite look like the deck that won the Red Bull event at all. I'm not playing Garrison Cat or some of these other things that punish sweepers, right? So, but I mean, it's all in I guess what you run up against, how you play, and all that. Again, if you're expecting nothing but sweepers and removal and whatnot, stuff like Garrison Cat is very good. So there's that. But either way, again, I want to be able to judge that deck in particular, and I want it to be a good deck. But again, off one result, I can't really say it's one of the best decks in the format. Especially considering if some of these other decks, like Mono Red or Rakdos Sack were to rise up, I think they're probably just really good decks against the Mono White deck. So, in any case, that's pretty much it in terms of the tier list. Again, Team Rec, best deck. Best girl is Team Rec, and then Bant Ramp in the second half of the S tier. But then Mono Green Stompy, Rakdos Sack, Jun Sack, all very strong decks as well. And then Mono Black Embrace, Sultai Ramp, Mono Red, and Yorion are all decks that I think could make a break at, maybe moving up a tier, but probably not being S tier anytime soon. I just don't think that they have any innovation they could do that's available to them with this card pool. So, but this is probably going to be the last tier list before rotation, and who knows what rotation will bring. But I want to do a whole video on whether or not rotation will be good or bad for Standard, if it'll change Standard, if it'll fix Standard. Because I think, just a spoiler alert, I think that when rotation happens, Standard's going to look very, very different. But that's all I'm going to say for now. Just let me know how you felt about these picks. Any decks that I missed that you might want to see? I mean, I know some people, I've kind of made fun of Doom Foretold earlier, but some people love Doom Foretold. It hasn't produced any results. I'm sorry. But, any decks that you think could be on here or higher up, just let me know down there. All that stuff, Also do the other things. Again, all of these decks will be available as deck lists in the description. Just click those links, go to TCG Player. If you pick up anything from those links, it helps me out tremendously, but you don't have to, right? You can also like the video, sub to the channel, hit the bell for the notifications so you know when I put out content. And then, of course, you can join the Patreon. Link in the description for that. $1 a month is all I ask. You'll be able to vote on content the patrons voted for this video. So, If you wanted to see something else, then you could have. You just be a voter. But aside from that, we will start streaming soon. You probably noticed the ridiculous setup. We got 2 monitors. We got this computer that changes colors now. My wife built that because she's very, very good at doing that. So this is a pretty insane computer with ridiculous specs. So we're gonna be streaming relatively soon. I just wanted to put this video out specifically, kind of before I started streaming. So probably early on this week we'll start doing some streaming over on Twitch. I'll let you know on Twitter when that happens. So follow me there at SBMTG Dev, and you'll get updates on when we're streaming and all that stuff. But yeah, we're gonna be doing it. It's what everyone's asking for. We will be doing that soon. So special announcement, everybody. We be streaming, but don't worry. We're still going to do YouTube content, deck techs, top 10s, all that good stuff. Spoiler content when that happens. So don't worry. I'm just going to run myself ragged for you people. But if you want to, I guess reward that, then check out the Twitch or just go to the Patreon. But anyway, I guess I'm done. This video's long enough, right? It's a long enough video. I think we've talked for a good long time. We've become friends over the course of this. So yeah, I guess I'll see you again soon, everybody. I'm Dev from the Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.